Somebody can't hold his liquor.
The Owl Origins Explored. Hi, this is Sam Canish and welcome to another Marvelous Videos. An owl is traditionally a symbol of wisdom, and Marvel's Leyland Owlsley proves that he is neither a dove nor a hawk, but an owl, one that's vigilant when others are resting. The star of today's show is a man who started taking a flight serum that quite obviously allowed him the ability to fly. But more importantly, Leyland Owlsley, or the Owl, was a cunning accountant who worked for bad guys and ensured that their money was almost impossible to trace. You could say that he was a strange version of Ben Affleck's character from his 2016 film The Accountant, but I am digressing. Stan Lee describes this man as a merciless man, a man with no friends, no loved ones, nothing to connect him with the human race, save the fact of his birth. And in this video, we will explore Daredevil issue 3, a 1964 comic that first introduced the owl to the world. But hey, we'll also explore the other stuff that he's appeared in, such as Netflix TV show Daredevil. So without further ado, let's dive into the owl. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you liked our content, then please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Leyland Owlsley, aka the Owl, Origins Explored. Written with raw realism by the legendary Stan Lee, the comic breaks the fourth wall in the third panel itself, where Mr. Lee begins describing the nefarious man that Leyland Owlsley, aka the Owl, is. The third issue of the Daredevil starts on Wall Street, the heart of America's financial ecosystem. An unnamed man enters a towering office building. By all means, Owl seems to be someone powerful, influential, and extremely rich. He walks through the huge marble lobby slowly, but with a steady and confident tread. He looks nowhere, ignoring the people around him as if he owns them all. But others cannot ignore this man, for his very presence is a beacon of something greatly evil and fraught. The ruthless financial wizard walks into his office, where his secretary tells him that his accountant, George Gray, is waiting. It is revealed that Owl earned his fortune by dubious and criminal methods, but at the same time, he knew that the authorities would catch up with him sooner or later. Therefore, Owl hired an accountant who could serve as a fall guy when the cops closed in. George Gray tells Owl that the income tax people accuse him of fraud. However, Gray gets the shock of his life when the Owl admits to framing him for crooked business dealings and tax crimes. Over the years, Owl had carefully arranged his affairs so that George would get the blame. The pale and haggard man rose from the table. He turns and shuffles out of the room, knowing that his world has just crashed around his ears. A few minutes later, there was a thud on the street below Owl's office, and the thud was followed by a piercing wail of sirens, which was heard by someone who daringly sat on the rooftop of a tall building. This sightless man knew no fear and swung into action. In no time, he was at the crime scene. I would like to note here that Stan Lee wrote the comics in an age where superheroes and their way of working weren't really famous, and if a blind guy was performing incredible acrobatics, it needed to be explained why, and that too in plain and simple words, which make the comics over-explanatory, at least by the present standards. Additionally, it was the Daredevil's third issue, so the character needed to be introduced and reintroduced to the readers. For instance, check out this one panel where Daredevil speaks to himself. Luckily, my built-in radar sense tells me how far I am from a solid obstacle, so I always know when to dodge and when to grasp. Anyway, Daredevil learns that a man had committed suicide by coming in front of a speeding car, and that this man, George Gray, worked for the Owl. Meanwhile, tax officers visit Owl asking him to be present at the headquarters for questioning. It turns out that Owl's master plan had failed him, and the authorities did, in fact, get their hands on papers that linked Owl to a string of fraudulent dealings and businesses. The crooked Owl was finally going to lose his financial empire, or was he? Upon reaching the headquarters, they asked Owl to hire a lawyer. And just to prove how powerful he was, Owl picked up a random lawyer from the phone book, and it happened to be Nelson and Murdoch. Yes, the same firm that Matt Murdock co-owned. Daredevil returned to his law firm, where his colleague and friend Franklin Nelson, aka Foggy, was on a phone call with Owl. Foggy wanted to refuse Owl from representing him because of the reputation Owl had. But Daredevil thought it was a great opportunity for him to get closer to Owl and his dealings. Naturally, Daredevil took the receiver from Foggy and told Owl that Nelson and Murdoch's attorneys would be happy to help him. Matt Murdock went straight to the court to bail his client out. However, Owl was present himself at the court at 10 the following morning. Murdoch uses his superior sense to learn that his client, the owl, is a man charged with sheer animal power and almost limitless energy, all of which is directed into evil channels. Nevertheless, Murdoch tells the owl about the scheduled visit the next day, and though Owl agrees to be present, Murdoch knows that he was lying because the owl's pulse rate sped up unnaturally. And that's exactly what happened. Daredevil had allowed a nefarious criminal to slip through his hands because he assumed that catching the owl would be an easy task, but all his attempts to search for the owl provided futile. He looked at every channel, the road, and air that could be used to escape the town, but Daredevil couldn't pick up on anything. It was a lesson for our new superhero about the fallacies of being overconfident. But where did the owl go next? Across the Hudson and perched high above the Palisades cliffs, there lay one of the strangest residents in all of the United States. It was the Owl's Eyrie, which was probably a play on words Avery. The house looked like a haggard part of a scenery when viewed from the river, but the complex structure had the same menacing aura as its owner. The owl had invited a couple of guests to his avian abode. He greeted his guests from the owlish throne-like chair. One of them was called Sad Sam and Master Marksman, and the other was called the Ape, because of the sheer brute strength of an ape that he possessed. Now that the world knew that the owl was nothing but a fugitive billionaire and a criminal, he wanted to make a career out of crime. But in order to do that, he needed henchmen that were feared. But before employing them, the owl put them to a couple of tests. He asked Sad Sam to fight a duel, much along the lines of a Western movie. Sad Sam fired his gun right into the muzzles of Owl's gun, preventing him from firing. As for Ape, he was to fight a snarling and savage gorilla that the owl kept in one of his cages. The ape managed to defeat the beast in no time. The owl was sure that a marksman like Sad Sam and a thug like Ape, he would be the undisputed crime lord of New York. Since he wanted the two men to never undermine his authority in the future, he showed them his own skills and abilities. The owl had used a chunk of his fortune to gain powers. When the man asked what the powers he was talking about, the owl opened a trapdoor, sending the henchmen down the floor and into the air. But before they could hit the Hudson to meet their sorry deaths, the owl jumped and glided through the air, supported by air currents. So the owl was aided by the cape-like garment that helped him stay aloft in the air and even allowed him to fly across short distances. Not only did the owl grab these men mid-air, but he also managed to fly upwards to his eyrie. And now he just needed one more thing, another fall guy. And who better than the blind, weak, and gullible Matthew Murdoch. He was inexperienced and helpless, or so the owl thought. Both Foggy and Karen were present at the office when Matt Murdoch sensed the impending arrival of the owl, so he sent them away to avoid any collateral damage. However, instead of Matt, the owl was greeted by Daredevil. Sad Sam and the ape attacked Daredevil, but they were not a match for Daredevil, his ferocious speed and cunning super senses. With his lightning-swift reflexes, he managed to knock Sad Sam and Ape down. But all went to crap when Karen returned to the office because she had previously forgotten her purse. The owl had no idea who this woman was, but Daredevil addressed her by her name, and it was the owl's cue for taking her captive. In fact, he even took Daredevil along. While Karen and Daredevil were kept in life-size cages, the owl was planning his next move. Once the underworld knew that he had captured the fearless Daredevil, none of the other crime bosses would dispute his leadership. He ordered his henchmen to contact every top gangster in the city and invite them to his avian house. Somehow Daredevil managed to free himself before ensuring that Karen was safe too. He sent Karen in a car and orders her to not stop for anyone but the police. The owl and Daredevil get into hand-to-hand combat, but clearly the Daredevil was more than a match for the owl's theatric. Having said that, the owl managed to escape. Back on the shore, Matt Murdoch and the cops rounded up the remaining crooks. Marvelous story arc of the owl defeated by Daredevil on more counts than one. It wasn't long after the owl and the Daredevil met again when the owl captured a judge. However, the owl escaped but decided to fly low for the time being, or at least until the heat dissipated. He soon moved to San Francisco, where he met another criminal named Mr. Klein, who tasked Owl with capturing the man without fear. But Black Widow saved Daredevil although Owl escaped another time. This time around, he moved to Chicago, where he attained a piece of technology that could drain knowledge from people. He returned to San Francisco with the tech and successfully captured Daredevil, intending to drain knowledge from his brain. In fact, he blackmailed Black Widow to kidnap a vet for him. However, this vet was now a superhero named Shanna the She-Devil. But the combined force of Shanna and Black Widow once again defeated the Owl. You definitely should check out this story from the Marvel Masterworks, Daredevil Volume 11. Serum's side effects screwed the Owl. The Owl was constantly using a serum that gave him his gliding powers, but there was a side effect to this serum. His legs were getting slowly paralyzed and his body was becoming weak. The only person who could keep him was a neurologist named Professor Brent Kerwin. In order to get to Kerwin, Owl freed a supervillain named Manbull from the prison, but Daredevil once again thwarted his plans. So the Owl took things into his own hands and abducted another neurologist named Dr. Howard Petrovic. And although Petrovic had built the Owl a device that could help him fly, Petrovic had sabotaged the device. He apparently fell to his death but was saved by his henchmen. But it wasn't before long that the Owl was once again defeated, this time by Spider-Man and Daredevil. Daredevil beats the Owl to a pulp. Interestingly, the Owl once had a turn of conscience, and he saved Spider-Man from a mind-bending demon named Copperhead, and it basically came to the cost of him falling back on his plan of taking down the Kingpin as New York's ultimate crime boss. The Owl was once jailed because of Daredevil, but things did not work out well for Matt Murdock either, because he was arrested on the suspicion that he was in fact the Daredevil. When Foggy Nelson came in as Murdock's attorney, it was rumored that the other inmates killed Foggy, which enraged Murdock so much that he beat the Owl to a pulp. He was present at the same prison. However, Foggy Nelson was safe and in witness protection. At a later point, the Owl also fought Parker Robbins, aka the Hood, who was the de facto kingpin of supervillains, according to One Story Arc. The Hood shot the Owl, but after his recovery, he appeared once again on the streets of New York City, and he fought the likes of Superior Spider-Man as well as Sinister Six. In fact, he managed to get Boomerang Defect from the Sinister Six and join him. The Owl versus the Shroud versus Daredevil. Realizing that New York might not be the place where he could build his empire, the Owl moved to San Francisco. This time around, he had an ingenious plan of using his wealth to buy Silicon Valley contracts, which soon turned him into the most powerful man, at least as far as the communications tech was concerned. But the Owl's meteoric rise brought him into the bad books of a mentally unstable vigilante who went by the name the Shroud. This guy teamed up with Daredevil to get the Owl, but the Shroud betrayed Daredevil, so when the Owl offered to reunite him with his ex-girlfriend named Julia Carpenter, with the Shroud's help, the Owl got access to cutting-edge fiber optic technology that transferred data directly to a person's brain, making them technically omniscient. Daredevil came to stop this, but he was a bit too late, and the Owl had already absorbed the abilities of his super powerful device. The Shroud then captured the Owl and used his Foundland abilities to look for Julia, but she was captured by the Kingpin. Ultimately, Daredevil and the two crazy villains join hands to save Julia, but in the end, the Owl disappears. The Owl appearances in the Netflix Daredevil show. Leland Owsley worked for Wilson Fisk, aka Kingpin. Owsley's primary role was ensuring that the huge amounts of profits that Fisk earned were impossible to trace. However, he also knew that working with criminals had its own dangerous nuances, and always kept a stash of cash ready in the off chance that he or his son, Lee Owsley, would need to run from these enemies and even friends. Nevertheless, Owsley was an able accountant and was rather farsighted when it came to business. When told that a masked vigilante was attacking illegal shipments, all Fisk had to say was, "I'm glad to hear there's some new blood running around out there. Heroes and their consequences are why we have our current opportunities." Now, that's pretty ballsy if you ask me, but Fisk was never really available when Owsley had to discuss something important. This and a few other things always kept Owsley suspicious of his boss. For instance, Fisk murdered one of the Ranskov brothers without consulting the other members of the organization, and if something like that could happen with one Russian, it could happen with just about anyone else. It wasn't before long that Daredevil confronted Owsley and Fisk and his illegal operations. Owsley tried to fool the masked hero, but he got punched in the face. Unfortunately for Daredevil, he got distracted by a sound coming from a distance, which gave Owsley enough time to strike Daredevil with a taser. Owsley then goes to Fisk, demanding to know what was to be done with his masked vigilante, and together Fisk and Owlsley revealed to the world that they were planning to rebuild Hell's Kitchen, which was in a decadent state after the Battle of New York, in which the Avengers defeated Loki and his Chitauri army. Nevertheless, Owlsley could see that Fisk's interest in the business was going down with each passing day, and the reason was Vanessa Mariana, the woman that Fisk loved. So he planned, with another member named Madame Gao, to assassinate Vanessa by giving her poisoned wine. However, the betrayal is revealed to Fisk sometime later, and Fisk beat Owlsley to a pulp before throwing him down an elevator shaft, where he dies because his skull split open. Alternate versions of the Owl. Interestingly, Leland Owlsley has appeared at least in 3 instances as a different version of himself. In the Age of Apocalypse storyline that came out in the year 1995, the Owl served as a member of the Marauders, who were basically a group of terrorists who had dedicated their lives to Apocalypse and his cause. But Clint Barton and Gwen Stacy kill the Owl, along with other members like Arcade, Red, and Dirigible. Likewise, in the Age of Ultron story arc of 2013, Hammerhead and the Owl capture the superior Spider-Man so that he can be traded with Ultron. But once again, Clint Barton saved the day. The Owl made a 3rd appearance in Marvel Zombies, but he was quickly finished off by the Punisher. What makes the Owl so powerful? I have to agree that the Owl is not among the most powerful of villains out there, but then again, I can't even deny that he's almost as cunning and vicious as the Penguin from the DC universe. The continuous use of the serum that gives him flight abilities has transformed the Owl's digital makeup. He can fly using a strong tailwind to several hundred meters at a speed of about 48 kilometers per hour. Additionally, his flight speed and distance increase dramatically if he dives from a chopper or a skyscraper. So basically, his flight efficiency intensifies when he starts from a considerable height or speed. But we don't really know the limit of his flying abilities, and it's possible that the Owl may achieve exceptional flying abilities in the future comics, which may someday translate into movies or shows. Furthermore, the origin of the flight serum is rather unknown, but that's major because the Owl is not as important as the other major villains in the Marvel universe. But what we do know is that the serum has caused his bones to become hollow, which makes him lighter and much more suitable for flying. Also, his lungs have expanded to a superhuman level, which enables him to keep his body cool during flight, which is a highly energy-consuming process. And although he might seem like an obese man, he has proportionately more muscles than someone who hits the gym daily. Naturally, he possesses superhuman strength, but then again, this aspect of the Owl wasn't explored in the Daredevil TV show. But the show did focus on the Owl's mental capacity as a wizard of math and finance. Apart from owl-like senses, this man can grow talons out of his fingers, and although they are breakable, they can do considerable damage. All in all, the Owl could have been someone as great as the Penguin, but in the end, he's probably just another one of the hundreds of lost opportunities in the Marvel character's arc. But I don't want to lose hope. Maybe the Owl will take flight and soar high in the sky, hunting those who live below. And if you liked our content, then don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks everyone.